Welcome to the Jobs and Work podcast. If you're like most Americans, you spend a significant amount of your time working. In fact, we spend more time at our jobs than anywhere else. But how often do we really talk about work in America? On this podcast, the Work for Change team will. Work for Change, LLC is a team of social scientists, thought leaders, and digital storytellers who dig into the critical issues affecting American workers and workplaces today. Our podcast is co-hosted by Dr. Kendra Jason and myself, Dr. Kris Maycumber. We'll also bring guests onto the show who reflect the diversity of the American workforce. We are so excited for you to join us as we lead the efforts to humanize the workplace by building dignity and equity into jobs, work, and organizations. Please subscribe to the podcast and share us with your friends and family. You can learn more about Work for Change at workforchangellc.com. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Jobs and Work podcast, where we talk about all things related to jobs and work. This is episode number 26, and today we're talking about In the News, and I'm your co-host, Kris Maycumber.
And I'm co-host Kendra Jason. And in the news today, we're going to talk about all of these instances that we're hearing about customers basically being rude, acting up, and causing a disruption in service, as well as influencing how workers are thinking about how they want to engage in a workforce, basically, if they want to continue working. So one of the most notorious stories that has come out just in the last week was on the American Airlines, I believe, where a customer was unruly and ended up being tied down to a chair with a gauze, a gauze over her mouth so that she couldn't speak. Not too much unlike the week or 2 weeks before, where airline customers were being asked to hold down an unruly flight, passenger, because this passenger had attacked a airline agent, customer service stewardess, airline stewardess. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so this is happening over and over again. And so Kris is going to remind us of some of these stories and give us some greater context about what's going on in these airlines specifically.
Yeah, so airlines are big business, right? So just thinking back about like the scope of how big the industry is, pre-COVID in 2019, 4.5 billion people traveled on airplanes. And nearly 88 million employees work within aviation. That's like a massive amount of workers. So when we think about the airline industry, the scope is just, huge. And what happens is tourism is one of those experiences where people have expectations, right? But they're thinking they're going on vacation, they might get delayed. And then for other people who work in tourism, their experience is totally different, right? They have work stress, they have job stress. So what ends up happening is like these sort of forces converge, right? And what we saw on a Southwest airline is somebody whose flight was delayed punched the gate attendant and they knocked their front 2 teeth out because their flight was delayed. Yeah. So this person is, required to uphold like federal regulations. So they're doing their job, they're at work, and they get their front teeth knocked out within a job where you're getting dressed up to go to work to serve the public, right? You're not going to a boxing ring, right? To have your front teeth knocked out because somebody is impatient and frustrated. So there is just, this industry sees a lot of hostility, but it's not the only one. Right? Kendra and I talk a lot about just different workplace contexts. So Kendra, do you have any other thoughts about other kinds of environments outside of the airline industry where we see general like rates of hostility increasing today?
Yeah. So, before we go there, I just wanted to talk about airlines just a little bit.
Go ahead.
More.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about Charlotte in particular, but there's been a lot of cases of, instances coming through Charlotte, but not long ago, again, within the last couple of 3 weeks, American Airlines had another instance where a group of high school students were traveling on American Airlines and they refused to put on their mask. Now, there's a question of how many actually refuse. Either way, it caused a disruption, right? And so a disruption to the point, and they were so hostile to the point, or caused an environment of hostility to the point that the airline decided to not take off. And all of those passengers, all of the passengers on this Boeing 747 most likely had to delay their trip a day because of a small number of high school students who refused to basically follow the protocol that they had agreed to in order to ride, to get on the ride. And so, of course, people lost vacations and people lost time, and it was just, huge. But then also thinking about not necessarily the customer experience, which is really important, right? But also, as Kris was mentioning, like for these airline stewards, like this is a very hostile work environment. They have very little support. If you think about it, you have 2, maybe 3 stewards on a particular flight, and they work together with the pilot who's busy flying the plane, right? In order to provide service, to maintain, an environment of comfort, during your flights. And we all knew that this job was difficult before COVID because there were hostile, people, and you're up in the air. We don't have, the air marshals like we used to, or at least in the ways that we used to. So they're really up there by themselves. And there is a great shortage. I think, Kris, you talked about this before. There's a great shortage of airline stewardess as well because of these combining factors, right? So Kris asked me about other industries. So one big question that everybody is asking, because they can't really seem to put the dots together, is where are all of the restaurant servers? Like, why are restaurants closing? Why can restaurants not keep servers? Like, they've been working for tips forever. So what is the problem now? And so the greater story to that is, of course, the call for higher wages is really important. And we've talked about that ad nauseum on this podcast, right? But another huge piece of the story is very, 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 very rude and hostile customers. And so what happens is, like, it's this perfect storm. So you have customers who come to a restaurant, as Kris said, expecting a particular experience. Okay, but let me tell you what's out of the control of the server, right? Number one, most restaurants now have limited menus. The reason they have limited menus in response to COVID is that they cannot get the supplies that they normally could get, right? And so there are particular ingredients that they can't get because certain farms, or many farms, are shorthanded because of COVID outbreaks, right? Or because they can't work in close proximity because of COVID. So that delays the volume of work that can be produced. And for those working in close quarters, it puts them at high risk for COVID. Once a COVID outbreak happens, that farm or facility to shut down. So they cannot get the ingredients or the tools. So not just ingredients, but we're also talking about, any type of tools, any type of equipment, any type of even alcohol, right? So, alcohol is actually sitting on the shelf. Sitting in breweries. We don't have truckers. We don't have enough truckers in order to ship the alcohol across the country. And because of COVID. So you have all of these limitations that happens at the restaurant. So the menu is short. And then there's not a lot of staffing because not many people are coming to the restaurants. They're not coming, number one, because they know there's a limited availability of food. They're not coming because they don't want to wear masks indoors, or it's just not a pleasant experience, or they don't want to put themselves at risk for COVID-19. And so if you know anything about service work, is that people work on shifts and they're assigned certain sections. And once those sections don't have the volume, they are sent home. So if customers are not coming into the restaurants, then there is literally no work to be done or not enough tips to make a living. Mm-hmm. So workers actually are able to have a better quality of life meaning a somewhat closer to a living wage, if you will, by taking unemployment, mm-hmm. because the wages and the tips are mm-hmm. menial. Yeah. They're not enough. And so if they work, they don't qualify for unemployment, but if they work, they're not getting anywhere close to a living wage in order to pay their bills. Right. So all of these things work in concert, right? So you have the stress going on, right? So then you do have your restaurant servers who are in the restaurant industry, mm-hmm. Taking the tips, being there. And then you have customers who are very aggressive, yelling, fighting, not following COVID protocols. And that increases job stress and health risk. And at the end of the day, the server has to ask themselves, is it worth the risk? Mm-hmm. Another thing too, just all included, is that low-wage workers do not get health benefits, do not get paid time off. Mm-hmm. So as they're putting their lives at risk so that you can have a margarita or you can have a taco or whatever it is, mm-hmm. if they get sick from COVID-19, there is no safety net, there is no health insurance that they are qualified for in their jobs. So if they get sick, then number one, they're not getting paid for the time that they have off. And if they get hospitalized, that risk, that financial risk is just way too much to assume for earning very, very, very meager wages. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of like a big picture of how it all comes together and why workers are not returning to work.
Right. And Kendra, what you just laid out is such an important part of this national conversation, because if I had a dime for every time I've heard people say in general, workers just don't want to work anymore. People just don't want to work anymore. It is such this like unilateral, like it's such a simplification. It's like what you just laid out, the health, not having adequate health care, putting yourself at risk in the food service industry. You are right there in the midst of what is more germy than touching people's food and touching their plates and being in space with them with all of those germs, touching people's cups. As someone who's worked in restaurants extensively in my early, teens to 20s, you are the messenger. When, like you said, when the truckload didn't make it on time and the fresh made pasta wasn't made that day, or you don't have the cheesecake that people are used to coming every Friday night and they get cheesecake at 7:30. Well, the cheesecake didn't show up at 7:30 that night. So as the server, as the, person who's delivering that message, you bear the brunt, you absorb the bulk of all of the other mechanics in the restaurant industry that did not go well, gets absorbed through you. And you get to then tell people to their face, no, we don't have cheesecake.
And then what's the consequence? People don't tip you.
They don't tip you.
They're angry with you. Yeah. Right. And so it's not a trade-off that if restaurant workers come to work, that they're actually going to get paid through tips, because angry customers always take out. It doesn't matter if it's the kitchen fault, the manager's fault, the work, it doesn't matter. They always take it out on the server. And they said, well, they don't deserve a tip. Right. And so it's just a catch-22. I am personally, honestly, really empathetic to the situation. I think the tipping model that we have in the United States is bogus in the first place, for a lot of economical reasons. But when it comes down to this, where people are depending on a living wage off of the discernment of random individuals, it's just a formula for disaster. And especially in this case in COVID, where, like you said, people have this expectation. I remember I went to a restaurant recently, and they told me that the menu was limited. It's like you said, that thing, I go to this restaurant for this thing and it's not available. I didn't even want to eat there anymore, but, and I just wanted to be like, I was like, oh man, but it's like, I knew I couldn't take that out on the server. It's not the server's fault that the the ingredients couldn't come from the farm, or that the trucking service, doesn't have enough staff, or, that the factory had a COVID outbreak.
Right.
It's not their fault. It's just these restaurants trying to, break even. They're trying to stay viable.
Yeah.
Think about how many small businesses, especially restaurants, have closed. They just couldn't. How many long-standing historical businesses, like restaurant, food service businesses, have closed in your local town or city because they couldn't withstand COVID-19. So the major chains have a lot more absorption, right? Because they have a chain network.
Yeah.
So they're able to keep to kind of keep, stay alive and stay open to a point, but it's not at the detriment of wages and hours and health risk for those restaurant servers.
Yeah. Small restaurants, family owned ones, the profit margin is so small and most don't make it. Like we know that pre-COVID, that most restaurants that open will not withstand the test of time and, to make it profitable.
Right.
And there really is no other kind of work. I mean, even if you're working a low wage job, it doesn't matter how many customers show up to McDonald's, you're working an hourly wage. You're going to get whatever, you're $7.75 an hour, you're $8.25, you're $12.50 an hour. Doesn't matter if 2 customers walk in or if 300 walk in.
Great.
Restaurant industry, you're only making a very low hourly wage. Your paycheck is menial. So you rely on those tips. So it does matter how many people walk in the door.
Right.
There's really no other industry where so much relies on how many customers you get.
Yeah.
So I think it's, like you said, to be at the mercy of tips, people are weighing, sort of outweighing the risk. That's a calculated risk. You're going to put yourself in danger for what? What is the sort of trade-off?
And then to think about, we're talking now just about the server who works in a restaurant, or, the airline stewardess who works, on a plane. But they are responsible for people. They are a part of a family unit. They are a part of a community, right? And so each time they show up to work, it's just like healthcare workers, essential workers. They are essential workers. Each time they show up to work, they risk bringing their exposure to that virus back to their home. Right. And then again, if you're thinking about just how big, this gets, if you're making low wages now, or if you've made low wages historically, then you don't really have an infrastructure. You don't have a health infrastructure. More likely, your health status isn't as strong as someone with a lot of resources and access to healthcare, because you've been, taking care of yourself without, outside medical intervention, because you can't afford it. You can't afford for your children to get sick, or for your grandmother who takes care of your children while you're at work to get sick, or, all of these things are so intricately linked. And like you say, Kris, for some people to, get, out of frustration or ignorance, or just blame, just say, well, these people don't want to work, is extremely short-sighted. And it's extremely, it really shows their limited understanding of how poverty works. Low-wage workers are in poverty. Restaurant servers are more likely to be among the working poor or in poverty than most any other population, right? Airline stewardesses and stewards don't make a lot of money, right? I'm not saying they make minimum wage, but they don't make a whole lot of money. And so, it's just, again, it's an economic, economic stratification. People don't understand, people don't want to take into consideration. So when you reduce it down to someone's motivation, and not consider that in order for that person to serve you that cheesecake that you like at 7:30, right? That they are balancing a risk. If I get sick, I may be sick for the rest of my life from COVID-19, or they're taking those risks in order, not just because they have dignity in the work that they do, but they have to make money, right? They have to work. People have to work. And so right now we have this really, really, really interesting time where the government is actually providing unemployment in extended ways. I mean, I know it's questionable now because things are changing with legislature. It's one of the most recent times historically that the government has not just automatically taken the side of business owners and just reduced the availability of unemployment to force people back into low wage work. Right now, the government is working to extend services and extend financial support to families so that they don't have to put themselves at this major health risk in order to afford medication and to afford food and to afford transportation and to pay their bills. So it's a really unique time right now. And I'm really, glad in a sense that workers in mass have decided to take advantage of not putting themselves at risk to reinforce this super low wage exploitive system. Now, how we come out of that is like Sarah Morgan was saying a few weeks ago, how we come out of that is up to us. It's up to workplaces, it's up to our government, but workers actually have a huge voice, and you can see the type of influence and agency that they have by withholding their labor right now and forcing these workplaces to come to terms with the fact that they pay too low wages.
That's what I hope happens, is that from this sort of, this shift in workers saying, no, I'm not going to do that, that the employers will have to adjust the way that they hire, the way that they pay. And, if you want to have a restaurant, you need people to work it. And if the people who are going to work it are saying, no, not on these terms, not in this way, then hopefully it does create a shift. I mean, that's to be seen, right? We'll have to wait and see what happens moving forward.
So speaking of in the news, one headline that I saw, I think this morning, I didn't read the article yet, so I'm not going to talk at length about it. But the headline was basically saying that Jeff Bezos was able to go into near space off of exploitive wages, off of poverty wages. Like, it has been historically known. It is in the news every day. Amazon workers on strike because of low wages, because of workplace conditions, because of exploitation, because of the lack of healthcare, because of the lack of a social contract. This has been the story of Amazon since Amazon has sort of blown up as our major, shipping, packaging, merchandise. Everybody's many people are Amazon users, even though, we know this exploitive relationship. Same with Walmart. Walmart family isn't going into space, far as I know right now. But it's really understanding that the wages are available.
Yep. Absolutely.
It is possible, right? That tax breaks and exploitive poverty wages have allowed a billionaire system, a multimillionaire system in the United States that flies in the face of everyday poor working families, right?
Yeah, I know you didn't. Yeah.
And we have massive unemployment because of low wages.
Yeah,
literally in the news this week.
There was a couple of very wealthy billionaire white men flying to space. That was like a theme of the last 2 weeks. So now it's, this like marker of, deep wealth is being able to fly to space. It's the new country club of sorts, is being able to say that I now go to space. So there is, that's extreme wealth. I mean, that is one example of trying to do things that nobody else has access to and won't have access to.
But it's not, to your point, it's not just an example of extreme wealth. However, it's an example of extreme wealth that was built on poverty wages. And so many people in poverty are on unemployment because they're not being paid a decent living wage. Jeff Bezos, I promise you, can still go to space if he changed his pay structure to pay Amazon warehouse workers and across the board, because Amazon is a huge system. It's not just warehouse workers, right? It's another
It
podcast,
is.
right?
Yeah.
It's a huge system. And if they pay people fairly for the amount of money that excess money that the Bezos of the world have, they can still do flight exploration. They can still do their, space tourism industry. They can still be those pioneers, And so it's just
And
that
people can be paid well.
you
It's
know,
not like a one or the other. And you can pay people living wages. Yep.
yes. And you could pay people living wages. It's just so amazing. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but even like, Jeff, awarding Van Jones $100 million for a courage award. That dude's already a millionaire, right? So you gonna award a millionaire a multi-million-dollar prize. I mean, that's his business. That's what you could do in the United States. That's what you could do, what you want to do with your money. And it's just it's putting things in perspective.
Yes.
Right. And going back to not just going back to what we were talking about before, not just rude customers, but rude customers are a result of poor working conditions, right? Because if there's an industry where rude customers are the norm, then that's the culture of the industry. That's just not random rude people coming into the business.
Right.
You get a whole lot more rude people or rude customers coming through McDonald's. Right. Robin Leitner wrote a whole book on it, right, about fast food interactions, like, because there is people have a sense of entitlement when they talk to people who are low wage workers or service workers or, fast food workers. There's a status that comes out. And it's funny, it's even if the customer is not in a greater status than the low wage worker, but in that case, right, in that dynamic, that customer, takes advantage of, the client customer relationship and abuses that through harassment and other violent acts. And so that's another thing, like it's workplace culture as well. What is happening, not just in the industry, but particularly in your particular workplace, that allows for customers to react in a particular way. And your person who plays the middle, like Kris was saying, the server plays the middle, they're the messenger, that they get the brunt of it. And there's no safety or security or support for that person other than maybe a talk in the office where, sorry that happened to you. That's not enough. That's not enough for job stress. That's not enough for, psychological support. That's not enough for mental support. It's not enough. There has to be a broader social support system for workers who absorb this harassment. Right. And then there has to be a change in the culture of how, in the workplace, in the industry, and just in society at large, at how we, interact with people who, because of their job status, we feel that, we can be aggressive or harass them or even violent.
Yeah. It makes me think of consumer entitlement and how that your entitlement as a consumer will vary depending on what the context of that interaction is. Like you talked about fast food, there's this like entitlement that comes with being a consumer. You're paying for this transaction. You want something back. It's like this quid pro quo. And if it doesn't come back the way you want it, then you feel entitled as a consumer to leverage hostility or to reprimand. I mean, you've seen people like reprimand workers, grown adults who have families and who have, mortgage and rent to pay are being yelled at by a consumer who didn't get their burger the way that they wanted it.
Exactly.
This like reprimanding tone. And then in other contexts, the consumer has entitlement. You can see this even in college, like the student as consumer model has made that experience different for some people. That might be a conversation for another podcast, is like the consumer entitlement and how it's different depending on the context of what they're consuming.
Yeah. And so, at Work for Change, Kris and I, we really dig deep into organizations and workplaces and talk these things out. We can't change everything on a societal level just yet. We're chipping at it piece by piece, but we can help you in your particular workplace make sense of what's going on and create better working environments and healthier working environments for everyone who's involved, for your customers, for your employees, and even for management and leader administration. So contact us at work4changellc.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and of course you found us here on YouTube. So please like, subscribe, and share so we can work to make the world of work better.